Hi, it's Carolyn. I'm here to help you learn how to bake and decorate amazing cakes, and in this video I'm going to show you how to decorate this Avengers cake, and I'm starting with both tiers already baked, filled, iced, and they are in the refrigerator waiting to be decorated. I have tons of videos showing you how I do that process, and that will be linked below. So let's get started.
So I want to start by going to my cake in the fridge and measuring how tall that I want these stripes to be. And it looks like they should be about 3 inches tall. Now I have Tylose powder mixed into all of my fondant. I only use marshmallow fondant. Store-bought fondant is way too soft. You sprinkle a little bit of this into the fondant, knead it in there, roll it out, let it sit, and it's going to set up harder and be so much easier to work with. I will link that below. So I rolled red and white fondant out pretty thin, and I'm cutting a straight line on the bottom, and I'm aligning that 3.5 mark at the bottom and making a little dotted line with my pizza cutter and then cutting that. So I'm making these 3.5 inches tall, and I'm going to cut them to size. I'm using my ribbon cutter to cut a bunch of these out. I'm removing the excess pieces that were in the middle, and then I'm going to take my fingers and just smooth those cuts to make sure that they aren't jagged on the edges. And I did the same thing for the red as well. And now I want to take my rulers and just straighten all of these out so they are drying straight. And I'm taking my X-Acto knife and cutting the very bottom off so it is nice and even. And now I am getting my cake out of the refrigerator. That icing is cold and hard, so I'm not going to mess it up. I'm finding what looks most symmetrical, and that is going to be the front of the cake. So I'm just going to mark it with I'm going to put a little arrow on the very top. And now I have a little bit of water here, and I'm going to go to the back of the cake and then hold one of those stripes up. It looks a little too tall, so I cut the top of it off, get a little bit of water behind it, and I'm going to stick that down. So I'm alternating colors. I hold it up there. I mark where it meets the very top of the one next to it, and I cut that top part off, get some water down, and then press it down. And then I'm going to take a red one, mark where it meets that white one, cut that top part off, and get a little bit of water behind it and put it down. So I'm going to do that alternating colors around the entire thing. And then there was a little void in the back that I'm just filling in with a thin piece of white fondant. I'm taking my palette knife and just making sure all of those stripes are level at the top. So I'm eye level with the cake. And then I want to cut a bunch of these white stars out of fondant. I'm putting this circle in the front because that's where the Captain America logo is going to go. And I'm just getting a little bit of water behind each of these stars and trying to evenly place them around the cake. Now I want to make the Captain America logo, so I have the circle cutter set and that star, and I just want to have a bunch of different circles. So that star is going to fit on that middle one, and then I want one that's a little bit bigger to go around that, and one that's a little bit bigger to go around that one. So it will all depend on the size of your cake, which ones you're going to use. So I'm cutting a blue circle out, and then I'm cutting a red circle out, and I'm going to stick that blue one in there. So I use that same circle cutter to cut both of those. And I'm taking a bigger one and cutting the white one out, and then I'm making sure that red border is even around the blue, and then I'm sticking it in the white. That way it's not going to shift. And then I'm taking in an even bigger circle and cutting that out and using that same cutter to cut out of the red, and then I'm going to stick that in there. Now I'm getting water down on this thinned white piece of fondant and lifting this whole thing up and transferring it onto that wet fondant and pressing that down, and then I'm taking that biggest circle cutter and cutting an even red border around the whole thing, smooth it with my fingers, and then I'm getting a little bit of water behind that white star and sticking that down in the center. And there is the shield. I'm going to set that aside to dry. Now I got the cake out of the refrigerator and I want to get this logo on here, so I'm getting a little bit of icing behind it, and I'm going to put some piping gel around the edge. That way the icing won't seep out the sides, and I'm just centering this to the very front of the cake, and I'm pressing that down. Now I have my airbrush gun. That dial controls the pressure, and there's the on-off switch, and you can only use airbrush coloring in an airbrush gun. I don't pull the trigger back all the way, just very slightly to get this spray, and I'm putting a little bit of it in there. I have a paper towel to use a tester, and then I just want to put some detail, airbrush detail in here to make it look a little more visually interesting. So I'm just going up and down around all of these stripes. And then when I get to the center, I'm going to go around that little Captain America shield. Now I'm trying not to do too much, just a little bit to give it a little depth. And then I'm also doing a little bit around all of the stars. And now I just want to deepen a little bit more of the detail in the shield as well. And then I just want to take a wet paper towel and just clean any airbrush coloring off of the cake board. Now I'm rolling this black fondant out really long and the gray fondant as well, taking my ribbon cutter and cutting that out and using my rulers to straighten it. And then I just want to cut a little thin ribbon out of the gray, and I'm just cutting that about 2 inches wide. And then I have some Rolcom Super Silver powder. I will link this in the description. I have a little bit of lemon extract, and I already had some in that cup, so I just added some lemon extract, and I am painting this silver. This is going to be the little belt that goes around the bottom. So I'm getting a little bit of piping gel around the bottom part of that tier and wrapping this black border around there where it meets in the back. Cut it and press the seam together, and then I'm getting some piping gel behind that silver part and sticking that right underneath the shield so it is front and center to the cake. And that looks good. I'm going to put that back in the refrigerator. Now I got this top tier out of the refrigerator. That icing is cold and hard, so I'm not going to mess it up. I'm getting some piping gel all around the outer edge of the cake, and then I rolled this gray fondant out really thin, lifting it up, and I'm covering this in fondant. Now I do have a video where I go into detail on how I cover cakes with fondant, and I'm going to link that below. So I get out all of the wrinkles. I use my fondant smoother to press it down to the very bottom of the board, use my little weird pinch technique to get a nice little sharp edge, and then I'm going to take a piece of fondant and smooth out the fondant. I just find that it contours to the shape of the cake, and you can really smooth the fondant nicely with a piece of fondant. I'm cutting off the excess fondant at the bottom and removing that, and then I'm going to add the details. So I have my Dresden tool, and I'm just putting these random lines in here. If it is hot and humid out, you need to do this quickly because it's going to start to sweat and it's going to be difficult to get these lines in here. But you can see there's a point to the Dresden tool, but I'm using the curved end just to do that. I'm going over the top of the cake. I'm just doing a bunch of different angles and trying to make it look, there's no rhyme or reason to this. It's just random lines that I'm putting all over this cake. And now I have a tiny ball tool, and I start at one corner, I go to the other corner, and then I do one in the middle, and then I fill the open sections in. That way it's kind of evenly placed. I go to the corner and then fill it in 1 and 2, and then the corner and then fill it in 1 and 2. This way it's more evenly spaced out. This is just my weird way of doing it, but do you see how I'm kind of twisting the tool to get it in there? You don't want to push too far because then you're going to poke a hole in the fondant. I'm just making a little impression, and I'm doing it on the inner and outer edges of all of these lines. It took probably about 20 minutes for me to get all of these in here, and don't forget to do it on the top of the cake as well. And that looks good. I put that back in the fridge for about an hour because it was getting a little sticky. Now I'm washing my hands, and I want to remove this cake that's taped to this cake board. I want to remove the tape from the bottom. It's going to be easier for me to transfer once I paint it silver. Now I have that same Rolcom silver mixed with the lemon extract, and I'm just painting this silver. So what you want to do is get thin coats on here. Don't do it too thick. So get a thin coat of this silver along the entire thing, and then I'm going to let it dry for about 5 minutes. That lemon extract evaporates really quickly, and then after it evaporates, I'm going to do an entire other coat that's really going to deepen it and make it look a lot more silver. And that looks good. I'm going to put that back in the refrigerator. Now, I printed these out the size I wanted them to be. I'm going to link those pictures in the description. That blue fondant is rolled out pretty thin. I have a piece of non-slip pad underneath my cutting board, an X-Acto knife with a wet paper towel, a Dresden tool, and a little bit of water. And I'm doing my trace, cut, and smooth method to make these numbers. So I'm tracing this number 5 onto this blue fondant. You don't want to press too hard because you don't want to poke a hole. And then I'm taking my X-Acto knife and cutting it out. And you can see the line that was transferred onto the fondant. And then anytime I cut anything out of fondant, the edges are going to be jagged, so I need to take my tools and my fingers and smooth my cuts. I'm getting a little bit of water behind it. I have a thicker piece of black fondant that I'm sticking this number 5 down to. And then I just want to take my tools and make sure this is in the correct position. I'm using a little round tip to cut out the center, and then I'm going to take my fingers and smooth that cut to make sure that it is not jagged. And since this is a thicker piece of fondant, I'm making a guideline cut first. So I'm just sticking the tip of my X-Acto knife into that fondant to create a little black border going around this entire number. And then once I have that guideline done, I'm going to stick the tip all the way down to the cutting board and cut this out. That way I can use that guideline as a guide, and I'm not going to distort the very top edge of this fondant. It takes a little bit more time to do it this way, but trust me, you get such cleaner cuts if you do that. And then I'm going to take my tools and press that fondant, any fondant that's sticking out, I'm pressing it back down, and then I'm going to use my fingers and smooth the edges. So I have it flipped upside down and smooth it from the back and then smooth it from the front. This is going to be on top of the cake, so you want it to look nice and pretty. Let's realign that on top of the picture so it dries to the correct shape. Now I have some thin gold fondant. I'm doing the same method to make this Iron Man face. So I'm tracing this on here, making sure I don't press too hard because I don't want to poke a hole in the fondant. And you want to make sure that you get all of the inner details of this as well. So those parts down at the face and the mouth. And then once I remove that paper, I want to take my Dresden tool and deepen all of these lines in here. And then I want to cut this out, and again, using my tools and my fingers to smooth everything out. And now I want to do the same thing for the eyes. So I have some thin white fondant. I trace the eyes on here, cut them out, smooth my cuts. And now I have some Rollicum Super Gold. Before I use silver, but it also comes in gold. So again, I'm painting a couple coats on here. I have it mixed with the lemon extract, and I'm just painting a coat on, waiting for it to dry, and then I'm doing another coat. And I should have put another coat on here because you could still see some of the brush marks, but whatever, it's still okay. And then I have some medium thickness of this deep red maroon fondant, and I'm tracing this on here, making sure I trace the inner details as well. And then again, I'm going to remove that picture and then deepen the lines, the inner detail with my Dresden tool before I cut the rest of this out. And again, this is a thicker piece of fondant, so I'm making the guideline first, and then I will stick the tip all the way down to the board and cut it out. And do I even have to say I'm going to use my fingers and my tools to smooth my cuts, make everything look nice and pretty. So I'm getting some water on the back, and I'm going to place this down. I have the picture close for reference to make sure that it is in the correct position. And I have some black petal dust with a paintbrush that has a really tiny head to it, and I'm just deepening these lines and kind of coloring it in just to give it a little bit more depth. And getting some water behind each of these white pieces and sticking them down, again looking at the picture to make sure they are on the correct angle, and just using some of that black petal dust to deepen the lines on the red piece as well. Setting that aside on a cutting board to dry. And now I printed this out on my edible printer. I do have a video showing you how I use my edible printer. I will link that below, and I'm cutting exactly on around the image, flipping that upside down, and then getting a little bit of piping gel on the back. I have it on a paper towel, that way I can go over the edges of that and make sure that piping gel goes to the edges. You want to make sure that the edges are glued down. Lift that up, and then I have some black fondant here, and I'm carefully placing this down here, making sure no air bubbles form underneath, and pressing that down. And then I want to take my X-Acto knife and cut an even black border around the entire thing. And then again, flip it upside down, smooth it out from the back, and then from the front. This is going to be on top of the cake, so you want to make sure it's nice and smooth and pretty. And let's set that aside on a cutting board to dry. Now I want to stack this cake, so I'm washing my hands. I get that bottom tier out of the refrigerator, and I'm using my little ruler to measure how tall I should cut these straws. Now I'm placing the straw on top of the ruler. I mark just over the edge with a Sharpie marker, and I'm going to cut that marker off, and I'm going to throw that piece away, so no marker is ever going to touch the cake. I'm offset stacking this cake, so everything is a little bit off to the left. I want to make sure that it is level and get some icing down. I have a video where I go into full detail on how I stack my cakes, and I will link that below. I got the top tier out of the refrigerator, and I'm putting that a little off to the left since this is covered in fondant. I cut a little hole out before I dowel the cake, and then I get a little bit of icing in there, and I'm going to take that piece that I just cut out and put that back on top and use a ball tool to smooth out this seam. Now I do go over that in my video on how I stack cakes, and that will be linked in the description, but you can barely see that I cut a little hole out there. Now I want to measure how big I can make this little Thor hammer, so I just wanted to measure that. I'm going to put that back in the refrigerator. Now I have some gray fondant. I'm going to get a little bit more Tylose powder in here so it can dry really hard, and like I said, you have to sprinkle a little bit on, knead it in there, and then I'm going to try to get it into a little hammer shape. So I'm going to roll it into a ball, and then I kind of want to flatten it into kind of a rectangle shape. It's still going to have rounded edges, but do you see how I'm flattening it, turning it to the side, turning it upside down, making sure that I can get all of the edges kind of flat? And then I'm just going to set that aside on a cutting board to dry just at room temperature. Now, I painted it silver. I forgot to film, so I just used that same Rolcom silver to paint it silver. And then I have a skewer here, and I'm making a hole before I put this in the cake. So I'm just twisting it in there, making sure that it is center. And I'm marking how far that's going to be sticking through there and into the cake. I'm taking an edible marker just to mark where I don't want fondant to be, because I'm going to cover this with fondant. I'm going to wet that top half of the skewer, and then I have some brown fondant, and I'm just going to roll it out slightly, stick that wet part of the skewer, push it down, and now I'm going to roll it in my hands and then put it on the countertop and roll it back and forth. I'm just trying to cover this in fondant. So I'm cutting off any excess because I want that green line to be exposed, and then I keep my hands in the center and I spread my hands out as I'm trying to roll this out to get it a little bit thinner. And then if it's sticking over the top, I can cut off the top, and then I want to expose that green line that I made before, so I'm cutting the rest off of the bottom. And again, just trying to make sure that is the equal width the entire way around there. And now I'm just taking my Dresden tool and making this little detail in here. I'm holding it on an angle, and I'm making sure all of these little swirls are evenly spaced apart. It's just something that you have to eyeball and make sure that it looks right. And then once I have that done, I'm going to stick that in a styrofoam block. I have my ribbon cutter, and I'm just cutting the little loop, so it's probably about 3 inches long. And again, I'm going to paint it silver, and I painted both sides, so I flipped it over and painted the top as well. And then I want to roll out the border for the bottom of the top tier. So I rolled out the black fondant really thin, used my ribbon cutter to cut a long ribbon. And now I want to airbrush this. So again, I have some black airbrush coloring in my gun, and I have that on a turntable, and I'm just trying to spray a little bit of black airbrush coloring in all of those little lines just to give it a little bit more depth. And then I want to spray this little hammer as well. So I turned it upside down, and I'm spraying along all of the edges. So I do the entire edge of the back and then down the sides. And then I want to flip it right side up and do the top edges as well. And then I want to spray all of the little lines on this top tier. And now I'm getting a little bit of piping gel around the very bottom, and I'm going to wrap this black border around where it meets in the back. I'm cutting off the excess and just pressing that seam together, and taking my palette knife and just making sure that it is nice and even. Then I'm holding that up to see where it's going to be touching the cake. I'm getting a little bit of icing behind it, not too much. You don't want it seeping out. I'm pressing that down. I'm just removing any excess icing, and then I'm seeing where that's going to fit on the cake, get a little bit of icing underneath it, and put that down. And now since that hole is in there, I could just take that little handle and thread that through, and that goes all the way down through that piece of fondant into the cake. Then I'm getting some piping gel down, closing that little loop, getting some piping gel on the underneath part, and sticking that down onto the hammer. And now I just want to hold these up to see where they are going to be touching each other and touching the cake. And I'm getting a little skewer in here. I can't stick it right through the middle. You're going to be able to see it. So pay attention to where it's going to cut the cake or touch the cake, and then screw it in there just until it goes into that bottom half. And then I'm getting a little toothpick next to it and getting some icing underneath it, and I'm going to press that down. The icing is going to seep out from underneath. I'm just going to take a dry paper towel, I'm sorry, that's a paintbrush, and remove the excess icing. And then I'm paying attention to where Spider-Man is touching the number 5, and I'm getting a little bit of icing on the front of his leg, and then I'm going to stick that to the back of the number 5. That icing is going to solidify when it goes back in the fridge, and that's not going to go anywhere. So any icing that's seeping out, I'm just taking a dry paintbrush and removing it. And now I want to make the name, so I'm doing the same trace, cut, and smooth method. I have some thin gray fondant. I'm tracing all the letters on here. Then I always cut the center pieces of the letters out first and use my tools and my fingers to smooth that, and then I'm going to cut the rest of the letters out. And then once I have that done, I'm going to paint all of these silver. So I have more of that Rolcom Super Silver. And again, I'm going to do 2 coats of this so it could really bring out the silver, get a little bit of water behind each one and stick that down. Then I'm going to cut an even red border around all of these letters and then take my fingers and smooth my cuts. Now I put all of these down on a cake drum first and get them in the right position, and then get a little bit of piping gel underneath each letter and stick it down. That way I can make sure that it is nice and front and center to the cake. And now I have some melted marshmallows in a bowl and some gloved hands, and I get a little bit out there. I press it together and then open my hands and wrap this around here. So again, I get a little bit more, rub it in my hands, open it, and it creates like a little web that I just wrap around the very top. And here is the cake. How awesome is that?
So there you go. How cool is this cake? And this is one of those themes that I've done so many times, and I've done a similar design, but just have very varied variation. There's a variation to the design. Why can't I talk today? But I've done it similar, but a little different. And that's what I try to do. I don't love copying my exact designs every time because I feel like I just get stuck in a rut and I want to try new things. But anyway. So this cake on the inside, the top tier is a 2-layer torted 6-inch and the bottom tier is a 2-layer torted 8-inch. And I have a video where I talk about when I tort and when I don't tort my cakes, and I will link that below. And it feeds 30 to 40 people. So I think that's it. What new techniques did you learn in this video? I would love to know. Leave it in the comments below. And just a reminder, I have ebooks with all of my recipes. I have my signature scratch pound cake recipes, my best doctored cake mix recipes, all of my buttercream icing and filling recipes, along with my favorite numbers and my favorite fonts. So they will all be linked below. And I do have a Cake Academy membership program where I can help you elevate your cakes to the next level. All of that information is in the description. Please like this video if you liked it, and if you're enjoying my tutorials, I would be so grateful if you could buy me a coffee. My link is down below. And I would love it if you would keep in touch on socials, and you can check out my website. And if you want to stick around, you can watch this video next and hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys. And remember, it's cake. Have fun. I will see you on the next one. Bye.